not actually starting, sorry. Oh, we are starting. Yes, we are starting. Hi, I'm Neil. I'm one of the product design directors at FanDuel. Just want to welcome you all here. We've been trying to get something happening in our Edinburgh collaboration hub for a while, so really happy to partner with UX Edinburgh and bring two great speakers into here. Let everyone see our lovely office. Hope you like it. And yeah, just kind of, I have to go through some of the boring stuff. So yeah, but hopefully you've all found the fridges where there's some beers, there's some taps, and you've hopefully enjoyed some pizza. Please take some home if you need any. But yeah, obviously there's no fire drill tonight. If you hear a fire alarm, it will be a fire. So please go down the stairs, and there's a muster point just outside Tesco, outside there. And there's no smoking on the terrace. I don't know if you found the outdoor terrace, but there's no smoking on that. You have to go downstairs if you need to smoke or vape. No vaping upstairs. And yeah, if there's any issues or anything, there's a few FanDuel folks kicking around, probably in hoodies or t-shirts at the back there. Cool kids at the back. So if there's any issues or anything, please reach out to them. Toilets were just around the corner. There's a sign there next to the very scary door that looks like it will set off an alarm. It doesn't set off an alarm. You're free to go through there. So hopefully you found the toilets okay. But yeah, that's everything from me really. Apart from just one last thing. So one of the areas that I cover is design operations. And that's kind of everything, just like how do we kind of make sure our team is set up for success. Anything from processes to training, hiring, that sort of stuff. Kind of looking to gather a few folks in Edinburgh, Glasgow, wherever in Scotland that are kind of working the same area. So I did a wee shout out on the UX Edinburgh channel. It's not even going to be a meetup. It's more of a self-help group. If we can get 5 or 6 folk just in a pub, just sharing some info, that'd be cool. So if there's anyone that works in that area, give me a shout, maybe after, come find me, and we'll go for a pint sometime. But with that, that's me. I'll hand you over to Mike. Thank you very much. Cheers. Enjoy the evening.
Thanks very much, Neil. So hi everyone, I'm Mike. I'm the organiser of the Edinburgh UX meetup group, and welcome to this, the first of our in-person events for 2023. Wow, there's a lot of people here. You're never quite sure with these things, how many people are going to turn up, but it looks like you all have. So, thanks for that. That's great. So I'm going to keep things brief because I know we all kind of want to get onto the main event. Just like to thank first of all Neil and the crew at FanDuel for hosting us tonight. I'm sure you all agree it's a fantastic space, the UK collaboration hub, and we've had a really warm welcome, and thanks for your hard work, Neil, making it happen. I really appreciate that. Thanks also to Alan over there, the man with the headphones, from Product Forge, who will be live streaming tonight's event. So yeah, thanks very much, Alan. Really much appreciated giving you time to kind of promote us more widely. And also thanks to all of you for being here. Giving up your Thursday evening. It was obviously a lot of things that you could be doing, but you've chosen to be here. So thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, without which none of this could happen today. So thanks to Rashmi and Hannah. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, which I think is you, Rashmi.
That's right. Yeah.
Come take the stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mike, Neil, and Alan, and everybody behind the scenes who I may not have met. I hope I'm audible. Just checking with you all at the back. Am I clear, loud? Okay, great. So I don't have to hold a prop to my mouth. Phew. And I know my family from India are watching. So hi to mom, hi to my brother. Hi to my 6-year-old and my husband from Edinburgh. And what a turnout. It's a real pleasure to see you all here this evening, because I'm going to be talking about accessibility. And, when I was doing my research on web accessibility, there was just unlimited content online on how to do an accessibility test. How do you start? Where are you going? But there wasn't enough on, let's say, where do you get started? What are the basics, right? What sort of basics do you need to know to get to the point where you can say, we can do some accessibility testing in-house. We can go and convince the client that why we need to make this product we are working on accessible. And if we don't do that, what is the business impact? So then I decided maybe I should focus more on what comes before accessibility testing and the run-up of what happens before, what you need to get prepared with to come to that point. So a little confession. A few days before, my 6-year-old sat beside me and deleted this whole presentation. Right? My heart was beating. I was panicked, of course. But I am so thankful to working on the cloud. I'm so thankful to the undo button. Yes, because these things happen, life happens, and good design is all about how you can bounce back to normality. How can you bounce back to good when things go bad? And this story is very relevant to human-centered design because there are different parts that make up human-centered design. And before I go into that, I'd like to say a few words about myself. My name is Rashmi. I'm the user researcher, one of the user researchers with InfinityWorks. We are a consultancy. We are a part of Accenture. And I've been working with NHS England. And we are trying to reduce the amount of time it takes to do a clinical trial in the UK. It can take a humongous lot of time to do what it takes to roll out the COVID vaccine, which you all probably took, and it saved lots of lives. So if we can reduce the amount of time it takes to get to do clinical trials and reduce the effort, reduce cost, that's a big win. So that's the bit of work that I've been working on for the last 9 months since I joined InfinityWorks. And yes, way back, 14 years ago, I started off my career as a graphic designer. And I've had my career in bits and parts. I've taken breaks to go study. I've taken a break to do something else. I've always come back to do something else. So from graphic design, I went on to do UI design, UX design. And along my journey somewhere, I started to get more and more attracted to speaking with end users because there were big business decisions being made on no basis. On what basis? Because somebody likes a color? What else? What are the other excuses? Right? It's because the marketing team wants it so, right? Right. So when I started talking with users, the fascinating world, the other reality world started to open out to me. And therefore, I started to do more of ethnography and user research. And that's precisely what I've been doing for the last 3 years. I've been working in the role of a user researcher very much. So because this evening's talk is about accessibility, I can't just talk about accessibility without talking about how accessibility fits into the bigger part of human-centered design. And if I can talk a little bit about that, in human-centered design, accessibility works very much in conjunction with inclusivity and usability. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what inclusivity means and why it is so important for accessibility. And what is the relationship between accessibility and inclusivity? Well, you can say accessibility means that it's about removing those barriers so that people with disabilities can do what they need to do in, say, more or less the same amount of time it takes for a human with no disabilities to do that task. If you can say that is accessibility, what is inclusivity? Go a further few steps beyond it, right? It's the principle, or you can say it's the outlook of ensuring that people with disabilities are included in what we do, and it's very participatory in nature. Include them in everything we do in the society. So that's a shift in thinking. And designing for inclusion, I see as a catch-all to stay true to the principle of accessibility. And this image here, it's a slice of Microsoft's inclusive design toolkit. Many of you familiar? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting why I love this, why I like going back to this is whether you're a designer or researcher, whatever your role is. Yes, we understand permanent disabilities, right? And many of you, including myself, at some points in our lives, we have met with temporary disabilities, like I fell off a bike and hurt my shoulder. I couldn't move my arm. I had carpal tunnel syndrome. I couldn't even lift a bottle of water when I had to care for my baby when she was 3 months old. So these are temporary disabilities. They don't last. They don't last beyond 12 months, and that's what is the definition. They're classed as temporary disabilities. But on the other hand, when you talk about situational disabilities, it gets very interesting. I wear glasses, and anybody here who wears glasses can relate to this. Riding your bike out in the rain can make you a little bit visually impaired, right? COVID times, we all had the masks on. People with glasses, oh my God, it was a nightmare. Walk into a shop, and I'm blinded, couldn't see a thing. Right, so that's situational disability. What else can we think of when we think of situational disabilities? I was in a shop checking out my stuff at the tills, right? And I packed everything into my bag. I had 20, 40 items. And then the cashier says, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Can you please bring all those items back? We need to rescan." I was like, can I just leave and go home? Right, I wanted to give up. What might have happened in that moment? I asked her, what happened? And she said, I pressed the wrong button. I was temporarily distracted. Distraction is a real thing. If you're a driver, you could be distracted, right? So she clicked the wrong button, and here on her UI, on that sales front UI, there was no option but to rescan all the items. And God, this has happened twice to me in the last month. And now moving focus to what accessibility is, the basic principle of web content accessibility is to make sure that all people have access to information. And this is regardless of the tools and technologies they use, regardless of whether they're using assistive technologies or not. And the very act of making this possible will bring about changes in your organization. It will force you to start thinking more transparently. Your governance will become more transparent over time, right? And it will reduce inequalities, because the sheer act of trying to do it, you will have to embrace the principles of inclusivity. And information at your fingertips. Can you understand your own health better? Yes. Why not? So it has a huge impact on our health and well-being. And there are so many other benefits which I'll have to think of and will leave you pondering over it. Let's take a moment now just to go back in time when accessibility was first mentioned by Tim Berners-Lee in the mid-90s at the Second World Wide Web Consortium. And a few years after that, the very first version of what we call WCAG. What is WCAG? Is there anybody here who doesn't know what WCAG is? I'm happy to explain. OK, so WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it is a set of guidelines, which means if you meet those guidelines, your website or whatever mobile thing you're designing for, it's going to be possible for somebody with assistive technology to use that. They could use a keyboard. They don't have to go through a mouse. They can listen to everything, the whole interface with the screen reader, right? So that's what it means. So the very first version of WCAG was released a few years later. And after that, what we say WCAG version 2 was released a few years later, where accessibility addressed or accessibility was taken into consideration to apply for across a whole range of web technologies. Back in those days, Flash. How many people worked on Flash? Java, JavaScript, right? OK. So, but nothing existed in place yet for mobile devices. Not yet. And come 2015, developers added information about relationships between elements on a web page. And what did that do? It meant, for the first time, people who used assistive technologies could understand web pages and the content on it, right? Because when you put on your headset to listen to what the screen reader is saying. And when you try tabbing on, everything, every element you tab on is announced, depending on whether the code has been written accessibly or not, right? And then you know what is it that you're navigating on. You know what to dive into. You know the content, just like you would know if you were seeing it with your eyes. And how should we present digital information? So there are certain principles that WCAG 2.1, which is the current guidelines which we follow, until the next one is due to be released in April. We'll wait and see, because that date's been pushed. OK, so information has to be presented in a way that is perceivable in different ways. It should be, websites should be functionally operable, and content should be understandable to all users. And it should be robust. Content must be usable with a variety of technologies, whether it's assistive or not. And it should stand the test of times, because web technology changes, and it changes very fast. If you can look at what defines a disability, going by the Equality Act 2010, if you're disabled, whether it's a visible disability or a hidden one, and if that condition impairs you in a way that it becomes really difficult to do everyday tasks like walking, talking, eating food, listening, if that becomes very difficult and that condition lasts for beyond 12 months, it is classed as a disability. It's incredible how fast my mouth is drying up. This doesn't happen when I talk at home. There are so many models of disability. But this is an interesting one because it's a stark opposite. The medical model says disability is the person is disabled, so the person is a problem. That's the outlook. But in the social model, the barriers are created by the society. And these barriers could be our attitudes, our prejudice, right? Preconceived notions. Somebody is disabled. They may not be able to do something very well. Somebody has dyslexia. Is it going to impact the work they do? The speed at which they can do things? So these are prejudices that impact and create barriers for people with disabilities. And within organizations, certain procedures and practices can make it even more difficult for people with disabilities to function normally. So therefore, accessibility, I say, is a mindset beyond all the principles. What lies behind it? There is a mindset of inclusivity. It's about how we go about doing those things every day in our lives. But being mindful of people who you don't normally see, know about, and to become more aware that people function in different ways. And how can we design for all these people? And here's a story, a little story, a snippet from everyday sort of a life. This person was on a Teams call, regular, mundane, sounds like everyday life. Yeah, it was an all-hands sort of a call where there were lots of people from across the company, 60, 80, 100 sorts. And the presenter who was talking and was also sharing his screen, he referred to something that he was sharing, and he said, as you can see, blah, blah, blah. But what he wasn't aware of was there was a visually impaired person on the call. And you can't just talk about, assume that everybody can see. But this sort of a mindset comes with practice, right? Comes with you developing that awareness. And this sort of awareness anybody can develop, given that we become more engaged in the topic. We talk about disability. We hear from people who have disabilities. We learn from them. We learn from them about how they conduct their lives every day. And we learn from them on the technologies they use so that you can design well for those technologies. And moving on to making a case for accessibility. There are so many times I've found I'm required to make the case for accessibility because people think of it as a checkbox exercise. People think of it as an afterthought, and that's not the way to go about it. Because if you're going to deal with making something accessible at the very end stage, it will look like a big burden. You're going to have to spend a lot of time and resource and money, and you will say no. And there are various approaches to going about making a case. You can go about making an ethical strategy case. You can go about making a financial strategic case to the client or to your company who you're trying to convince why we should do the right thing. Okay, let's take a look at what those things are. So if you were to take the legal route and just say, hey, we need to do this because that's the law. That's the law in the UK, right? Public sector bodies must comply with accessibility requirement. And you got to make your web service all those 4 things. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, the basic principles. And though this legislation doesn't really mention YCAG 2.1, but by meeting those guidelines, you are making sure that you are sticking to the legislation. I'm just curious, how many of you here work for public sector or have public sector clients? Wow, that's quite a few. So you know what I'm talking about, right? And this, what I'm going to talk about here is an extract. It's from the House of Commons library that was shared or published in last year in the summer. And there's a graph here that shows the percent of disabled people in the UK starting from 2002. Feels like a long time back. But anyway, what it shows is the graph going up. We are in 2020. It shows up to 2019. So that's the latest records or census we have on the percent of people in the UK who have disabilities. And that is looking, what we understand it as 22% of the UK population. And if you look at it in verticals, in smaller slices, 9% of children have one form of disability or another. 21% of working age people are known to have one or another form of disability, and 42% of pension age people. So I'm growing older, all of you are, and the graph goes up, right? The probability of me developing a disability is going to go up. Same goes for everyone. And if you were to design systems, it's good to keep this sort of a card in mind. Something like 1-point-something humans in UK have one or another form of disability. So that's just probably a little oversimplified visual there to show 1 in 5 humans. Here's another confession. Okay, I really struggled with male and female icons. I debated in my head, male, female, how many male, how many female? Oh my God. And then that led me down another research hole. So it turns out in the world we live in, there are 102 males for every 100 females. So how should I fairly represent it? Thank goodness for my design and research buddies who critiqued my work on that, and apologies. So I revised it a little bit to reflect that. So globally, it's not just disabilities, right? There are other things that come into play. There are chronic conditions. Globally, 1 in 3 people are living with chronic conditions or long-term conditions. And these conditions are things that you can't cure. You can treat them using medicines or therapies. And that's the only control you have on that. So what are the consequences of neglecting web accessibility? Apart from very frustrated users, they'll go somewhere else. Oh, this is not easy. They'll jump onto something else. If it's just information, maybe you're not much at loss. But if you're trying to sell something, are you going to lose potential customers? Yes, you are. And the biggest risk here is it's going to damage your business reputation. Think of all those people who are going to think of your brand as being inaccessible. of having some service which is inaccessible. And legal aid, if somebody sues your company for having a product that's inaccessible, you could be a bank, you could be a public service, and that's not going to be cheap at all. It would be cheaper to invest in accessibility. We're going to see that. We're going to see the figures, what the figures look like. Sorry, I forgot to say, there is a company called Freeney Williams Limited. I wasn't very aware of this, but this was a very interesting thing I stumbled upon in my research. They're one of Europe's leading disability and diversity consultancies. In 2016, they published a groundbreaking report called the Click Away Pound Report. Anybody familiar with it? It's called the Click Away Pound Report. Brilliant. Okay, so it was interesting because it analyzed the experience of people with access needs when shopping online. It was the first research which quantified the online spend of users with access needs and the potential commercial opportunity represented by an accessible and inclusive web presence. The results showed, unfortunately, very disappointing lack of progress when it comes to accessibility over the last few years. We're going to see what that looks like. So that happened in 2019, WebAIM conducted an accessibility evaluation of home pages of the top 1 million websites, right? 97.8% of 1 million home pages failed for accessibility. Despite this study was done using only Wave. How many of you are familiar with Wave? Great. Wave is one of the web automatic tools you can install. It's a plugin on your browser, right? You can run the test. You can see so many errors. What are the errors? What are those accessibility errors? How to fix them? Wave helps you. Well, there are lots of tools. I'll go a bit later into that. But basically, despite being evaluated with only Wave tool, that's the amount of home pages that failed accessibility. That's not looking happy. 69% of disabled online users left the websites that were hard to use and they went somewhere else. And what does it mean? What does all this mean in real quantity of money? So it is estimated that the online spending power of people with access needs in the UK is £24.8 billion. That's quite a significant number. And the annual online sales missed by UK retailers is £17.1 billion. Incredible, right? So at times when you need to get buy-in from business, you could use a few of these strategies. So many of these strategies are things I've had to use in the past with different clients and businesses. So I would say it starts with you. You have to first start talking. Sorry for that image. At least it's not a very military, we need you sort of an image. Anyway, it starts with you. It really, really starts with you. And unless you don't speak to represent people with disabilities, people are not going to become aware and businesses are not going to care. So you have to start talking. Talk within your client space. Talk within your project space. Bring it to the forefront. Raise the profile. And accessibility is one of those things that has a trickle-down effect. It has to start from the top. So make sure you make friends with the top stakeholders. You make friends with top execs. Get them to buy into this principle, right? One, there is the ethics behind it, of course. It's ethically. We all know and agree that it is ethically the right thing to do. And people will nod, say, yes, yes, that's a good thing to do. Watch. 1 month will pass, and then 2 months will pass. What have we done? Oh, nothing. Oh, sorry. Can we just talk about it again? Oh, what was it? Was it important? So you have to keep talking about it. It has to become the fabric and the culture within your client space, within your organization. So you can take the ethical approach. You can take the financial approach, which we saw, all that money, right? When everything fails, go for legal ramifications. and bring out instances of lawsuits and how much it costed. If you are a public sector and somebody sues you for information that's inaccessible, it could cost you humongous amounts. And it's cheaper to build accessibility in from the start. And I can't talk more than advocate for demo of live testing with users with disabilities. Involve everybody. It's not just your team. It's not just the designer. Involve the PO. When I do accessibility tests, one day I invite the PO in. Another day I invite the Tableau developer in. Another day I invite somebody from sales in, right? They all get a feel, and that's the reality. It's very embarrassing to watch somebody really struggle, right? I was once on a call with a person who was partially impaired. Everybody in the business said, 2FA, everybody knows how to do 2FA. Everybody is familiar with 2FA. What is 2FA? Two-factor authentication. Even the terminology is so inaccessible. People really struggled with it. And this person, being partially impaired, could not do it. She gave up. It was so difficult. Same goes for QR codes. She tried scanning a QR code. It was one of the tasks that I was testing for because we had it on the page. No, you can't do it. So you've got to have alternative way of consuming information. And to develop accessibility as a mindset, where do you start? Here's a bunch of recommendations based on the lessons I've learned personally. And to have an inclusive mindset, it means start getting involved with people with disabilities within your organization, right? Because you learn from them. You learn a great deal from them. Everything I've learned, a lot of the things I've learned is from participants, which I've fed back to the business as insight and recommendations. And having an inclusive mindset is crucial. It's foundational. That's something that you can develop as you engage more in the topic of disability and engage with people who have disabilities. And I was once dropped into a project. It's all real life, right? Nobody begins everything from the beginning. Sometimes I find myself doing discovery at a beta stage. It's like, how can I retrofit this? Well, real life has happened, right? So I'm here in this project and asked to do some testing, right? Okay. What's the technology like? Okay, our service lives within a secure space, a secure environment, because we are dealing out the high security data. So everything needs to live within the secure environment. So the technology comes with some severe limitations. And the technology, turns out, is inaccessible. Who procured that technology? At what point did that technology get procured? Did people even test it before putting money and time into it? No, they didn't. So now we are in a position of pushing boundaries as much as possible. Lots of talks with the developers on how we can come up with alternate ways of doing what's needed. And it's such an uphill battle. You'd rather have started baking accessibility into the code. And if you had started doing that, you wouldn't have been spending this much time fixing problems. And time is money. If you're a developer, is there any developer here today or anybody who writes front-end code? Brilliant. You're at an advantage. Because if you can train yourself in how to write accessible code, you can bake it right from the start and make that part of your design systems. And design systems are not one thing fixed for all times, right? Like everything, it should evolve. If you find out today that the language 2FA is not very accessible, challenge it with, have a discussion around it. And if it requires a deep dive, do a deep dive, learn about it, and recommend a change across the organization. Right? Can we have an alternate way of signing in? What's the other thing? Yeah, engage with people with disabilities to learn from them. And these are the questions. I'm going to talk about questions that are important to ask at the beginning. What is your role? What is your role going to be if you're put on a task to make something accessible, or if you're a designer and you're not yet thinking about it, what is your role in making your product accessible? And what level of compliance do you need to meet? Depends. If you're a company based in USA, you'll be following American laws and regulations that you need to meet on accessibility. And whether it's A or AA or AAA, find out what your business is committed to. And what's the budget that we have? What's the time we have? Because accessibility testing, in reality, takes time. It takes time to plan, it takes time to do it, and do it with care. When you're testing accessibility with participants who have disabilities, allow yourself more time. See, for example, if you can get through five user tasks in a usability test session, allow yourself more time per task if you're testing it with somebody with disabilities, because it is going to take more time for you to learn, for them to figure things out. Think also what capabilities you don't have in-house or within your team. Think who can we partner with, right? In the past, I have partnered, or our teams have partnered with organizations such as People for Research, there's AbilityNet. These are great organizations who can help you figure things out. They'll help you find participants as long as you tell them what profile of participants you're looking for. They'll help you with incentives, right? That brings me on to another topic, incentives. Factor in when you're scoping cost for a project. Factor in how much is it going to cost. You have costs to include for usability tests. You have costs to include for accessibility tests. And depending on the country you're operating from, or wherever your company is based in, headquartered in, and has to follow those rules, there will be certain legalities around something like incentives. You may not be allowed to do Amazon vouchers, for example. You may not be allowed to deal with cash. And these are all legalities of your own companies or client companies that define this. And the sooner you ask those questions, it's better. This is an approach I developed while I've been working with NHS England. And this is a very simple approach. Basically, take time and over time, increase business confidence. When you have wireframes and you haven't tested it yet, what do you have? You have assumptions. You take those assumptions, and then you do usability tests, and you learn so much out of it, things that you couldn't even think of, but there are going to be lots of things you can take away from them and form hypotheses. Because when you form hypotheses out of your user testing sessions, you can say, these are the things I'm going to test, deep dive, with people with accessibility. And then when you do that, you have evidence to present it back to the business. And here are a few fundamental steps recommended to ensure accessibility compliance. One, do basic accessibility tests. You can come up with like 15, 16 checks that you need to do manually. It's not difficult at all. I learned it in a few days. There are lots of organizations teaching that. Somebody like AbilityNet offers amazing courses on how to get started with accessibility testing. Highly recommend them. They're fantastic. They're a charitable organization, and it's the cheapest courses you can find with completely hands-on, and you can get on, run with it sort of courses. There are lots you can find material on that. And any UX professional can learn to do that. And second, doing a deep accessibility audit. I don't have the knowledge to do that because I would need knowledge of front-end code, Java, and I don't do that. But there are people who do that. It's done by expert accessibility auditors. And you can hire this service as well. And finally, you have to test with a representative sample of people with disabilities. And this is, again, something that any UX professional can learn. And yes, I talked about those basic accessibility checks. And this is what it is in plain terms. And now, sorry, each of these have a bunch of YCAG 2.1 codes associated with them. I omitted it because it just looked too jargony for this evening's session. However, I have you can have access to them in, I've created some workbooks for you all to take away at the end of this session. So you can still look into that. So things like basically, in a nutshell, what this means, all these 16-something checks, manual checks. You've got to check if what you have is keyboard operable, are screen readers announcing things. When you're tabbing on a UI element, is there visual focus for partially sighted users? Right? Are there labels? Are there clear labels? Are images having alternate text? Are videos having alternate text? And are the page titles consistent? Is there alternate navigation? Is there consistency in how you navigate? Is the language making sense? So this is a simple framework I came up with because I struggled. I wanted to find a way to make this work. So I didn't know who are the participants who you should think of to test something with. There are lots and lots of types of disabilities, and who are the right people? So okay, so it's simple. You begin with hypotheses to test, right? So you take a bunch of hypotheses. So say, for example, you saw some people who are entering information into the fields, and it was prone to human error. You noted it, so make that your hypothesis. You noted something else, text size is too small, people struggled a bit, they didn't say anything, but they struggled a bit, so note it. Note that as another hypothesis to test, right? Go with that, go with your list of hypotheses. And then look at what factors they relate to. Is this a measure of readability, attention span? The fact that you have to go through a page of very wordy content with no images? You're going to struggle for attention span. What about text size being too small? Is that a factor of legibility? So start mapping what factors each of your hypotheses relate to. And from there, it's going to lead you directly onto impairments. What type of impairments map onto those factors? And I didn't know, so I had to learn about different types of disabilities. I started learning about dyscalculia, dyspraxia. What does this mean? Okay, we have this huge table of numbers. How is somebody with dyspraxia going to handle that? How is somebody who struggles with numerics going to understand that? Right? You start learning about disabilities, and then you think, what type of product are you designing? What type of what kind of people are likely going to use your product? Is there going to be somebody with a type of disability likely going to be using your product? So consider all those framing and questions and try and map those out under impairments. And then if impairment itself can be categorized, map that back to those categories, and then you see for what categories you're testing. So where this helped me was then to define who are the participants that we are looking for. Then it helped me write an invitation letter within the NHS, because the NHS have an ability network comprised of people who have disabilities, and they volunteer their time to test any service that NHS rolls out. So it was great working with the ability network team. It means in the letter, in the invite, I could clearly invite the type of participants I was inviting for testing. Few other things you need to get started with prior to accessibility test. It's, of course, you write your user tasks. What are the key tasks that you want to test for? Not everything. So about 3, 5. And identify what those key page types are. You don't need to test all the pages for accessibility. You need to test main types like homepage, search results, an end content page, article page. If a page has media on it, right, like mixed media, it could be audio or video or has images. So see how many different types of pages you have. So gather those. And then ask, your product is going to be supported on what browsers? Right? Talk to people who are technical in your team. Find out what those requirements are. And then start looking at tools, or if you already know your automatic tools, accessibility automatic tools, start playing around with them if you're not familiar. Like I wasn't familiar with a lot of these tools, and I allowed myself some time to simply experiment, play, see what this can do versus that tool. right? Then start looking for efficiencies. Which tool can identify more errors than another tool? GovUK did a brilliant, fantastic audit on a lot of accessibility tools. Google for it, you'll find it. And they basically mention there are some automatic testing tools that are far more efficient than others. So see what works for you. You don't need, here's another thing, you don't need lots of tools. You need a handful of them and you can run with it. So I checked out a lot of tools, about 15, 20, 25 of those, and there are lots, there are more than 100. So you don't need all of that. So it's a simple cheat sheet here, which you can take away at the end. So I went with Wave, Headings Map, Accessibility Bookmarks by Paul J. Adam. I went with a YCAG color contrast checker on my desktop, lovely tool. And I went with VoiceOver because I work on a Mac. I used to work on, I have worked with JAWS before, back in the day where it timed me out every half an hour because my company didn't pay for it. It is expensive, mind you. It is what, 700, 800 pounds for, for the software. And if your company hasn't already invested in it, look for free tools. I would say there are more than enough free tools for you to get your job done. And with one caveat here. Please do not rely entirely on automatic tools because they are not known to flag up all the errors. Less than 50%, way less than 50% in fact. So rely on manual accessibility testing. It's a great way to do it, and it opens your mind out. You can go inspect the code of an HTML page. You can look at the JavaScript. And initially I couldn't make sense of any of this. But then I learned, over the years I learned, and it is really not scary stuff, I assure you that. Even if you're not very technically minded, it's fine. It's not scary. So simple things. When you start capturing what you find in terms of errors, it's a very simple framework here, right? You got your issue description. Write what is the issue that you observed. So one of the issues I observed was, I'm tabbing, and there is visual focus, but the screen reader is not announcing anything. It's not telling me what is what. So close your eyes, and you have no idea what you're tabbing to. So make note of the problem. And you use your automatic tool to find out what the fix is. For example, something like Wave is going to give you quite a detailed description of what's missing in the code. And it's a recommendation. Right? You bring it to the table, go discuss it with your developers. That's what I did. Some of these things don't make sense to me because I don't write code, right? But then I open these things out to the tech team, and we have discussions. We look at all the findings together, and we learn from our tech team as well of where the limitations are, and then we collectively sometimes think of workarounds. And this sort of a visual, because I was struggling how do I communicate so much to the top execs? They'd never have time. They've got 2 minutes. They say, okay, can you give me your top 3 problems? What do we need to fix? Can you show them one visual? Can you show them one visual? Yeah, look, 50% of what we've made is inaccessible. Is it a go or no go? You tell me. And do you know where the problems lie? Problems lie there, everywhere where there's red. Can we convert those to green? Yes, you can, and you can convince them. With this, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Thank you so much. Thanks. I'll leave the screen on here for a bit, so please note the URL and maybe take a photo or something if you like. So there are some worksheets that I developed through my work. And these are worksheets that you all can use. Some of them maybe you would like to print as posters or cards to remind yourself. But some others are very practical worksheets. There's a spreadsheet there. A lot of the things you saw are on the takeaways. So yeah, feel free to use it, modify it, bring it back to the community, right? Maybe another day. Say what works, what worked well for you, what didn't work well for you, and feel free to improvise it. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Rashmi. That was really interesting. Loads of food for thought there. Just looking at time, I think we're running a little wee bit behind, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll take Q&As at the end, if that's okay. And yeah, just help yourself to a drink or some. I'm sure there's some pizza over there as well. And we're going to be back in 5 with our next speaker. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. I hope you're feeling well refreshed. I'm just going to hand you straight over to Hannah. I'm going to get out of the way just to start her talk on ego, the obstacle to design success. Over to you, Hannah.
We just had a debate about whether my grammar is correct with the semicolon. I don't even know if that's a semi or a colon, but I'm running with it. It's right. Is it wrong? Oh, well. We're here now. No ego. Yes, exactly. No ego in this. So like Rashmi did, I'll do the thank yous. So thank you all for indulging me in my talk today. Thanks, Mike and the Edinburgh UX team. Thanks, Fanjul. I'm incredibly jealous of this venue. And it's so nice to see some of my IW people in the audience. So thank you, guys. That's probably why there's a lot of laughter during Rashmi's talk over this way. I'm Hannah. I'm design practice lead for Scotland in InfinityWorks. As Rashmi said, we're a consultancy that's been acquired by Accenture recently. So today I'm going to talk about ego, which I'm sure will create some interesting debates if some of you guys are going to stay for some drinks after. So yeah, let's get into it. So I think we can all agree that designers have improved, our roles as designers has improved over the last few decades. There's more buy-in for design, there's more designers in leadership, there's more, I suppose, want for kind of designers' voices in the room. And there's an understanding that great customer experience results in great business. Yet it's still frustrating to see design kind of fail to make waves in some businesses, or that the products and services that we create and we kind of pour our kind of hearts into and we design fail to make the market or to get into the hands of users we design for. So I've spent most of my kind of professional design career in what I would call design safe spaces, and I will explain that. It's kind of the first 4 bubbles. So these spaces are kind of the agencies, the advertising kind of spaces, some in-house teams where we're kind of a tight-knit clan and we're all kind of one group that stays quite close to each other. And, you know, at times we think we know best. And without malice, at times we may have othered teams. Teams that we come across, so such as clients, perhaps leadership, and we say, you know, we don't think they get it. The engineers aren't making what we ask them to. Businesses just don't value design. And those are all the reasons why our designs don't make it to reality. But it wasn't until moving into the technology consulting space where, you know, designers weren't the only voices I was hearing every day. I was hearing a lot more from sales, marketing, engineering, a lot of more technical voices, that I began to reflect on kind of my own practices. You know, have we missed the point? Are we part of the problem, perhaps? Do we really need to be educating others on the value of design, or we may be creating some hurdles or problems ourselves? And I put a little kind of irony klaxon in here because I am talking about myself in an ego talk, but you know, had to be done to set it up. So when I talk about ego today, I'm not going to focus on the kind of psychological or personality traits of ego, more around our impact as a practice, as a role, as a team in an organization. And ultimately, I'd like us to increase our self-awareness a little bit and try and look at us from the outside in. So let's shed the unicorn label for a moment or two. Let's put down the Post-it notes and think about what we bring to the table. When I was preparing for this talk, I found a lot. I didn't think this would get so much of a laugh, but cool. So when I was preparing for this talk today, I came across like so many articles, so many talks on the topic of ego or arrogance in design. Lots of people kind of say design can't exist without ego, and there's obviously lots of talks around designers being too arrogant for themselves. And those that argue that there is no design without ego kind of say that we take other people's ideas and we make them better. We are the unicorns, we're the superstars. We have a discerning eye and we know best. We've been there, we've done that. We've got the Moleskine sketchbook to prove it. But ultimately, what are we here for? What do we want our legacy to be? Do we want to be known as a great designer or for the problems that we solve? And I'm going back to my design theory days a little bit. But when I was thinking about this talk, this kind of product comparison came to mind. And you can tell I probably did a product design degree in art school with this comparison. But both of these products can juice a lemon. But the one on the left, yes, the one on the left, you could argue falls more into the kind of art scale of art and design. It's bought more for the fact of what it looks like rather than actually what it can do. And quite frankly, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to use the juicy salif, but it'll mark your worktop more than give you lemon juice. And the second started with a problem, and it never lost sight of it. They asked themselves, how can we make something for people that have, I suppose it's accessibility, right? That have problems with kind of dexterity and strength. And sometimes we are guilty of losing sight of the problem we are trying to solve. Both of these are valid products in their own right, but I know which one I would be reaching for if I ever made lemonade, but I don't. I'm not going to lie about that. So we as designers need to understand that our job will always be about somebody else, whether that's the client, whether it's the business we work in, or the user we're designing for. This doesn't mean you cannot challenge the status quo, you cannot challenge your client or leadership and dare to stand for something you believe in. To have the confidence in ideas, pitching recommendations to stakeholders, some ego can help us with that, right? It'll help us be brave to tell somebody that, something can be done differently or perhaps better. But there's a fine line that we need to walk there. And during my career, time and time again, including myself, I've seen that designers can perhaps be quick to blame others rather than look inwardly at themselves. So where do I think we could do better? I think it comes down to process and how we work, collaboration and our collaboration with other teams, and our knowledge beyond design. I'm going to take a small pause for a sip. So let's start with our process. So we designers like stuff. Don't think that's a surprise. We have a lot of it. And when I say stuff, I mean the physical things, the Post-it notes, the sketchbooks, the fancy pens. But I also mean the frameworks, the deliverables, the user journeys, the personas, the canvases, the inspiration cards. I had other stuff, and I also wrote pause for breath because there is a lot of things to list here. And it's not new to say that sometimes we care a little bit too much about the stuff we create on the journey that we're on, and we lose sight of the end goal. I'm sure that most of you recognize this is the design thinking process. It's essentially what put us on the map. It's kind of given us a voice in business. And it's a 5-step simple process that's sequential and easy to follow. And it's a recipe to solve all of your business problems. Well, in a way, it's a 5-step simple process, but sometimes it's 4. If it's a really big problem, we'll take 7. We've kind of gone over and over this point, I suppose, a lot. And with that traction, with design thinking, I suppose perhaps has come a little bit of distraction. We've over-engineered what should be a framework, and that we can use, that we use to accelerate problem solving, but we sometimes don't admit that it's not the be-all and end-all. I stress on the word framework because it can be changed, it can be disrupted, but it also could be disregarded, if I dare say so. I'm not anti-design thinking. I just think that we can over-egg it, and we can over-egg its importance. No mention, well, here, there's no mention of delivery, there's no mention of launching, scaling, measuring a product or service that we create. And not everyone has been convinced by design thinking. And sometimes when we find ourselves in those situations, we come up with diagrams like this. I actually don't know who created this, so I'm sorry if you're in the room. But yeah, we try and come up with things to discuss our importance. We kind of say stuff like, yes, design creates some upfront challenges. Maybe we'll slow things down. And if you bring in designers from the start, things will feel uncomfortable. You might be confused, but trust the process, trust the designer. Otherwise, you're doomed because the unintended consequences. I understand what this diagram is trying to say, and I don't disagree. I don't disagree with our value that we bring, but what I do think is it overinflates our value, and that can be dangerous. Nobody shouts about their processes like a designer does, and perhaps we become a little bit too precious in following it. We talk about it a little bit like it's a science, and that nothing will happen without us. And design isn't new. Like, things were designed before we had kind of all the fancy terminology and the canvases to go along with it. What's new is bringing in that human-centered element, that human-centered mindset that Rashmi spoke about, the focus on solving user problems to create better things. But along the way, we can get stuck in our own kind of design labyrinth that we created for ourselves, justifying the process, developing materials, and not getting on with it. So let's focus on solving the problems rather than documenting them. And we can be our own enemies in a way. We can be the perfectionists. I'm certainly guilty of this, because we can idealize our process, which results in us finding it hard to know when we've done enough research, or we've done enough ideation, we've done enough workshops, we've got enough Miro boards, and to admit that maybe we have just a little bit too much stuff. And that delays us from delivering something of tangible value to the customer. And then I think we then perpetuate worry, because if we've created all this stuff, we've delayed getting something out there, that we worry that it's going to be too rough to put in users' hands potentially, and the worst will happen. And even kind of going on from that, and to make matters worse, when we do put something out there, we forget it. We hope for best, we don't measure it, and we leave on to the next thing. So this is kind of my advice when it comes to process. We should be doing the minimum we can to get something into users' hands. I'm not saying don't do usability and accessibility testing, by the way, Rashmi. When I say minimum, that's not to take design and all of our efforts out of the process. It's just being okay with something that is enough. And I don't think it's too controversial to say that if something is out there, it's real. And if it's real, there's a better chance of it fixing people's problems sooner. So collaboration is my next point. I hope we all know this, that design is a team sport. We all come together. Many heads are better than one, because we need diverse thought in our process. We need the experts in different fields, and we need to come together. But the design process is inherently collaborative, right? Well, yes and no. I've been reflecting on this, and I think we all have really good intentions, but I've seen teams fail because designers, as designers or designers that I potentially worked with, we think nobody in the organization that we're working with is talking to each other or has even thought about talking to each other. And at the start of the project, we can use discoveries, we can use design thinking, and we can use workshops to bring people together, but without understanding if stakeholders have been there before. We can bulldoze into a project when we should be building trust. First, you need to show people, and the people that you are going to be working with potentially for a long time, how much you care about their problem, how much you care about their knowledge that they bring, their experience, and the business goal that is driving the project. Only then can we expect them to change their ways and impress them with our design talent. And true collaboration isn't design reviews. It isn't 2 to 3 workshops and ideation workshops. And it's not a handover to an engineering team. And this is not an attack on Lena either, who's in this picture. Throughout a project, our interactions with the business can be fleeting and they can be limiting. They become a little bit more like transactions, where we then go back into our Figma or our Miro boards and we can disappear for a while. And we come back with the magical solution, which could be alienating for our non-design colleagues. And the act of solving business and strategic problems is human-centered, it's empathetic, it's creative. It's not necessarily design. It can be done very well by us designers. I think that's why we're in the room, and I think that's why I've just had an update that I've got a Mac with no deferrals, but it's fine, we have an hour. I won't be here that long. Yes, this is why we're in the room, right? We're very good at these things, but no one person or role exclusively gatekeeps the user experience or owns the user experience. And others will be designing your products too. No matter whether we try and shield it or protest it, it's something we have to get comfortable with. And make best friends with the people that make you nervous or your most distant colleagues. And I do have I think people I work with will know, I call the most scary person on a project my project best friend, and I aim for us to be best friends by the end of the project. And I think that's something that's worked really well in the past. When we embrace true collaboration, our boundaries of our discipline will blend, and that will feel uncomfortable. Perhaps that's why some of us experience imposter syndrome. I'm sure a lot of us do, because it'll creep in as we let go of control. And the more we empathize with our colleagues in the business, the more we will help to solve business goals as well as user goals. And lastly, knowledge. Us designers are taught how to build empathy, how to do user research, how to use Figma, Sketch, all the tools that we love so dearly or debate about quite fiercely. But we become really focused on developing these tools, these skills, and we fail to learn about the business of design. Over and over, when companies talk to designers, they hear about design craftsmanship. They hear about brand consistency. They hear about high fidelity design, prototyping, style guides. And all of these things are good, and they're all very, very important. But for us to truly understand the best way to help a business, we have to start focusing on what makes a business successful. We need to understand what makes a business tick, and then the better and then we will better understand where to apply our craft or where not to apply our craft. But it's completely understandable. I had a great time creating this slide. I just Googled business. So that's what this is. But it's completely understandable that why we shy away from this all, and why I shy away from it, because business concepts can feel more complicated than they are. It can be extremely scary. I don't know what half of these acronyms mean or whether I've made them up, but it's there. So there we go. And with these insecurities, I think like I said, we can shy away from it. And with that kind of shying away from things, and we're pushing them away, we're widening the gap between us and our business colleagues. And in turn, I think we may have done the same with our concepts. I kind of mentioned earlier that we might kind of over-scientify, I'm taking that as a word, our process. We immerse, we synthesize, we ideate, we create artifacts, we integrate inspired design with expert execution to articulate immersive and resonant brand experiences. This is from a real website about how they speak about design, not Infinity Works. I'll put that out there. But we are making design as exclusive as business seems to us sometimes. Instead, we should be bridging the gap and trying to speak the same language. And we don't have to be great at everything. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, we need to be aware that there is more to an organization or a project than design. Maybe we should try and learn about the issues a CEO or a senior stakeholder or any stakeholder faces and try to use design to solve their problems. Maybe we should try to figure out what keeps them up at night rather than what keeps us up at night. And if you develop a mindset that you don't need to know it all, what you need is the people in the room and others to complete the picture. That's when you can become a better designer and you can make better choices. Then we can gain the respect that we seek. So I encourage you to reflect, as I have done. You might think I'm being a bit too harsh on us, but I'll be interested to hear what you think. Are you being a great designer? Do you have a great process? Are you following the steps we've been told or taught to? Or are we doing what we can to design or create great things for people? And if there's anything you take away from today, I've got a little mantra that I'd like to share with you. So be useful, understand your constraints, do the minimum you can to get something valuable into users' hands. Be kind to others and be conscious of their knowledge and experience that they bring to the table. And stay curious. There's ways to solve a problem. It might not be using design tools. So that's me. Thank you.
Wow, what a couple of great talks we've had tonight. And I don't know about you, but my head's like buzzing with kind of information and kind of things to think about. Neil, where's Neil? Just a quick time check, Neil. Are we good? Are we free to take some questions? Excellent. Questions for both Hannah and Rashmi. Do you want to come up? And if anyone's got any questions, we can take a few questions. Questions? Is that you? Oh.
Quick mic.
It is. Go on, get up.
There's other hands.
There's a hand there.
Is there one already?
Talking to this? Oh, there we go. Spring.
Can hear you.
Thanks for putting those together. That was awesome. Definitely.
It's my brain just going, both in terms of my arrogance and also in what I'm building for people that can't use the things that I'm building. I want to go back to about disability because I'm really interested in to understand before people even get into the digital sphere, do we understand what devices different disabilities are using and what they are drawn to in order to even start to begin to look at the digital world? And do we understand, you know, what they're doing with those devices in order to even start to access them? Because I saw in one of the images, someone had an external device that just used a laptop. So do we understand or know anything about that?
I can draw from my own personal experience. The most I've learned really is from people who have disabilities. And within Infinity Works, we've got communities on Slack channels, and we have dedicated channels for disability, neurodiversity, and accessibility, and they all really do tie in together. And we do make it a practice to talk about it across the organization, because this sort of stuff draws people from across the organization, across the practices, right? So that you start to become aware that, oh, somebody can use this device to do this task which you can do without assistive technology, and how this assistive technology works. How is screen reader working? Some of the most insightful sessions I've had is by watching them use these technologies, and the best ways I've been able to make a developer understand of what is happening or why something isn't happening is by having a friendly chat with the developer and saying, the screen reader is not announcing this element because this code is missing in the HTML code. And I don't write code, but I started learning more about this by examining what comes out of recommendations out of accessibility tools such as Wave, and there are several others, and it will get into the code and tell you what needs to be done, and then you start to become more familiar, and then you start to read more about it, and at least that's what I did. It's just constant exposure to these things, and like any other tool, you need to just practice, and the more you practice, the more you get a hang of how it works or how it works for them, because unless I practice, I will never really get it. Good question, thanks.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you very much both for your talks. Very interesting. Also a question about the accessibility talk. Way at the beginning of your presentation, you said that disabilities are increasing in terms of like the percentage of the population. Why is that? Because I struggle still with the definition of disability a little bit. Not all disabilities are really relevant for, you know, digital products. Others might be for physical products, right? But in terms of overall disabilities, why is the amount in terms of percentage going up? Is that because we call disabilities to more things than before? Is because health is getting better and people are living longer with these disabilities?
I don't know the answer to that, but yes, it's a multifaceted one to think about, because our society has become more aware of disabilities or different types of disabilities, and why we need to include them, and that is making people who have disabilities become more comfortable to talk about it, right? Because there are dedicated communities. We have created safe spaces, and until we created these safe spaces, these voices weren't heard as much. They were probably ostracized. They were probably seen as not good enough. Right.
Not even call it disability. Would not believe they have a disability at all.
Yeah, like take for example hidden disabilities, right? Yeah. How do you tell your employer, I have Asperger's or I have dyslexia, and I'm going to do my job fine? You know, you don't need to worry about, but I have certain conditions or requirements to be met, which are called reasonable adjustments, and if the organization makes reasonable adjustments, then it means they're facilitating their employees to be more productive at work. They get their job done. Everybody, it works both ways. And the other question is more of a medical question. I have probably dabbled a little bit into it to understand. People are starting to understand why there are certain disabilities like dyslexia, and where does it come from? Does it come from, does it get even passed on generationally? What were our ancestors exposed to in terms of toxins in our environment? That's like, wow, there's a whole lot of knowledge out there which is just not known and people are just finding out. I think that's a big question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was a PA, personal assistant before doing UX, so I could understand how people with disabilities struggling with using digital products. So I think that was like a valuable experience for me to be a PA. And for some companies, they start thinking about accessibilities at the last stage, which was just too late. And I'm just thinking how to let stakeholders engage with accessibilities at the early stage. They did.
Which is the reason it gets completely missed and becomes an afterthought. Because when they procured technology, where was the requirement to check, to assess that technology, to say this is fit for purpose? Because we're going to be putting end users from public, whether the product is paid or not, someone else is going to be using it. It is not people from within your organization. It's going to be somebody external. It's going to be external paying customers. So if nobody really evaluated that tool but procured that technology, then you're going to end up discovering that at a stage too late.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's my company to think about.
Regarding legacy technology, if you come into a role and you inherit not fit for purpose technology, at what point do you start advocating for a more starting from scratch approach, if at all?
Get your point. Like if I say something is fit for purpose, nobody's going to listen to me, right? Even if it is the right thing. But if I show that it's not fit for purpose because the users are struggling and they're failing, how can you get a business afloat if people are failing? So is the business then going to consider or maybe start becoming open to the idea that they need to replace that technology with something better? And that is the beginning, to start having those conversations.
Thank you.
Question for Hannah. Do you think design is facing an existential crisis, and is it trying to do too much?
I think I was when I wrote this presentation. I think it's a really big question. The reason I started actually writing this talk was there was a bit of a debate in our design team around, like, what do we call all of our roles? And we've all been there, we've all done that. I think the debate was, do we have service design in our organization anymore? And I've just kind of gone, I'm so sick of this. Like, I think we just need to be calling ourselves designers. And I think we just need to be focusing on problems. And I think, yeah, I think trying to see the wood for the trees is kind of where I'm coming from. So I don't know. I individually had a little bit of that. And this is where the talks come from. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's a lot of different roles that you term a designer, and they do different things and they have different approaches, right? And I suppose what's the glue that kind of holds those things together?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, yeah, I don't think we shouldn't have the design roles like the specialists, right? Like we need those. I couldn't do my job without those people that absolutely love having the expert skills, because I just do not have the patience for that, to be honest. I think the glue that holds us all together is it is that problem solving, right? We are on a mission to make things better, and admitting that design happens all around us, but it's really trying to be the facilitator of that and really just try and bring that human element into it. And when I think we say human element, yes, the users, yes, it's people that will be using it at the end, but I think we do miss the humans along the way that we design with or for as well, right? Because yes, a product that's going to end up potentially saving lives, like in the NHS, also could support somebody get promotion because, you know, their bonus is attached to it, or there's other things that I think we need to think about. And I think it's just that problem solving that's the glue in a really cheesy way.
That's great. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Follow on from Mike a little bit and talk about. I've been a designer for a long time and doing design and then doing other things and then coming back, and I was kind of trained to do design in a certain way. You know, you interview your stakeholders, you gather lots of information about the problem, and then blah blah blah, and tools help us like design thinking. But running out of breath. I've noticed that, or not just me, but you know, there's a conversation about what's been taken out, product owners and other business teams, and then I wonder if our existential crisis is in a way like we're in a corner, and like parts of our profession have been taken away from us. And you know, we're kind of brought in to colour in at the end, too late, and things like that. So, but what do? You know, you have all these skills, and where do you put yourself to be useful and kind and whatever else? You know, it's like, I don't know.
Really big question, and it is, I suppose, there's like the other side of the coin. And for me, whenever I find myself, I think what I used to find myself doing is get really frustrated for being the person that was brought in to do the colouring in, because it happens, right? We all are that person. Even we think our closest allies then use the jokes if you're head of crayons, or you are, oh, you're the colour person, so what colour post-it note do you want to use today? But for me, I'm like, it's a journey. They're gonna get it when we are useful. So let's do the colouring in, but let's smash the colouring in, and let's be the project best, like let's find the project best friend who's asking me for that, and just keep asking them questions and understand them. And that's where we can start chipping away at doing more and being that kind of like design facilitator. And that's kind of where, yeah, at times you do just have to get on with it. You do have to create something and just make it real. But then we can be useful because we're asking all the questions that they might not have asked themselves along that journey. We're not going in with the protest of, I don't just do the colouring in, which I'm sure we all don't do, right? But at times I think we might do that, and then actually we're alienating those people that we could kind of get on side. So that's how I go about it, try and chip away at those people. And yeah, I don't care what they call me, just try and be useful and think about the end goal.
It is really interesting. You know, and I really totally, you know, feel for what you've said. I think, you know, there is a lot of artifacts and we do use them to do useful things, and they're tools that help us. But other people can do that as well. Yeah. And then, you know, but it's a little bit like, oh, you know, I'm here, I'm being paid. Where can I find the place where I can actually do something? You know, and we kind of have to, not everyone, I'm sure, but sometimes I think we have to find a corner for ourselves.
And it might be a different corner on a different project and taking a different hat. And that's why maybe I was like, what kind of designer am I? I don't know, I'm just gonna go with designer because next week I might be doing something completely different. So, but it's useful and it's for, you know, what we're trying to create at the end of the day. Yeah.
Hi, Rashmi. So I wanted to ask, do you think if there's any difference in how accessibility is approached for a B2C product versus a B2B product? Because the nature of the product is very different, the complexity levels, as well as the target audience, the scale of it is quite different. If you think there are any differences.
Yeah, I know what you mean because I used to work with your team previously. I've had a bit of experience, I guess, dealing with that problem space. So of those many customers that I did usability tests with in that scenario B2B, there were some customers who had arthritis and said, your interface is too mousy. I'm a keyboard person, right? Why don't you make this all tabbable? They said things like, why can't I go into this drop-down menu and use my keys? Why do I have to mouse it? So whether they're still humans, they're still going to behave like any other customer, right? And they're still going to have the same problems that anybody else might deal with.
I'm curious, like, because in maybe the B2C section, you can source or like you can you can look for people to come and do accessibility testing with you. Your product's going to be fairly simple for the general public to do, so you can get anyone in to do it. But when you're working on very specific kind of problems with a very niche target audience, how do you recruit for a more diverse set of people to do accessibility testing?
In fact, that's the very last of the 3 recommended steps. You can begin with audit. You can begin with an accessibility audit, and you can catch a lot of problems right there. And what you're asking is a bigger problem, which is harder to solve. But you can take that first step of doing the manual audit and using tools to determine where the problems are in the first place.
So you mentioned previously, like building communities within the company so that you can start discussing these things. But I don't know if there's other people who create maybe these safe spaces maybe amongst the customers, and you can actually see them discussing the problems that they're having with these things. Like, I don't know, how would you approach something like that?
Yeah, I think of what I've learned, a customer has always been thankful for someone who's hearing them out. They just need a space, a person where they can voice it with. And if they get the feeling and the feedback that the company is listening to us folk, we are being heard too. And if the company can take steps to build that trust with that group of people, that would be the beginning. And I think that will lead you to answer your question.
Time for one last one maybe, and then we'll, if anyone's got a burning question, otherwise we'll call it a night.
So I'm just going to ask Hannah, what colour of post-it note did you pick?
Pink.
Always pink. Yeah, excellent.
Or yeah, or red or purple or blue, you know, I do like all the colours, but yeah.
Depending what type of design you do,
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks again to our speakers. If we can give a big hand to our speakers tonight. Thanks to Alan and to Neil for hosting, and Vanjul. And we are going to go. Well, some of us, hopefully, will go to the pub now. So we've got the. I've never been here. I don't know where it is. Look it up. The Fountain Bridge Fox. I think it's pretty close. We've got some space booked there. So if you want to, please join us and continue the chat. Thanks very much for coming tonight, and we'll see you again soon.